A whisper in the crowd. The city park was alive with its usual energy, a patchwork of sounds and scenes that made it a sanctuary for families and individuals alike. The laughter of children mingled with the rhythmic squeaks of swings, while the scent of freshly cut grass and roasted peanuts drifted lazily through the warm afternoon air. Officer Jack Monroe walked along the park's winding paths, his sharp eyes scanning the environment with the practiced ease of a seasoned officer. Jack wasn't on duty in the traditional sense today. This was his usual beat, but the park had always felt like more than just a place to patrol. It was a respite from the chaos of city life. He often enjoyed seeing families together, a sharp contrast to the fractured homes and troubled lives he frequently encountered in his line of work. As he approached the playground area, a small figure caught his attention. A little girl sat on a bench just outside the main play zone. She was clutching the stuffed bunny so tightly that its one floppy ear hung limp, as if resigned to its fate. Her head was bowed, and her shoulders hunched, giving her an air of isolation that didn't fit the park's cheerful mood. Jack's instincts, honed over years of dealing with all kinds of situations, kicked in. He slowed his pace, casually adjusting his uniform to appear less intimidating. The girl couldn't have been older than 7, her pink hoodie paired with faded denim overalls that were slightly too large. The contrast between her solitude and the vibrant activity around her was jarring. He approached with care, stopping a few feet away. "Hey there," he said gently, crouching slightly to meet her eye level. "Are you okay? You look like you've got a lot on your mind." The girl flinched, her grip on the bunny tightening. She lifted her head slightly, revealing wide brown eyes that flickered with unease. Her gaze darted past Jack's shoulder, as though she were looking for someone, or something. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then, after a pause that seemed to stretch forever, she added 4 chilling words, "Or else she'll know." Jack felt a prickle of unease creep up his spine. Her words carried a weight that seemed far too heavy for a child her age. "Who's she?" he asked, his tone still soft but tinged with concern. Before the girl could answer, a woman burst into view, her hurried steps kicking up dust from the path. Her disheveled appearance immediately set Jack on edge. Her hair was unkempt, and her clothes looked as though they had been hastily thrown on. Dark circles framed her eyes, and her movements were frantic, almost erratic. "There you are," the woman exclaimed, her voice a strange mix of relief and agitation. She reached the bench and grabbed the girl's hand with a grip that seemed too firm. "I told you not to wander off." The girl shrank under the woman's touch, her head bowing once more. Jack straightened to his full height, his expression calm but probing. "Ma'am, is everything all right here? You seem a bit flustered." The woman's eyes flickered to Jack's badge, then quickly darted away. She forced a strained smile. "Yes, everything's fine. She's my daughter. She has a habit of wandering off." Jack's gaze shifted to the girl, who stood silently by the woman's side, clutching her bunny with both hands. Her small frame seemed to shrink even further under the woman's presence. "What's her name?" Jack asked. "Lily," the woman replied without hesitation. "And I'm Claire. We really should be going. She's not feeling well." Jack nodded slowly, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "Of course, just wanted to make sure everything's okay. You take care now." Claire gave a curt nod, already pulling the girl away. As they walked off, the little girl glanced back over her shoulder, her eyes locking with Jack's for a fleeting moment. There was something in her gaze, a silent plea that made his chest tighten. Jack watched them until they disappeared into the crowd. The park seemed to close in around him, the sounds and sights muted as his mind raced. Back at the precinct later that evening, Jack couldn't shake the encounter. He replayed it in his head, analyzing every detail. Something about Claire's demeanor, her hurried movements, and the girl's haunting words didn't sit right. As he passed the bulletin board on his way to his desk, his eyes caught on a missing persons flyer. He froze. The photo showed a young girl with bright brown eyes and a wide, innocent smile. Her name was printed in bold letters beneath the image: Emily Carter. She had disappeared from her suburban home a month ago. Jack's pulse quickened as he stared at the flyer. The resemblance was undeniable. The girl in the park, the one Claire had called Lily, looked exactly like Emily. He snatched the flyer off the board, his mind racing. If his gut was right, the girl he had seen today wasn't Claire's daughter. She was a missing child. And she was in danger. Threads unraveling. Jack Monroe sat at his desk in the precinct, the image of Emily Carter's missing person flyer still fresh in his mind. The hum of activity around him faded into the background as he stared at the details of her case. His instincts churned, the faint echoes of the girl's whispered words in the park fueling his resolve. Emily Carter had disappeared from her front yard a month ago while playing with her favorite toy, a stuffed unicorn. A neighbor had reported seeing a blue sedan parked nearby moments before Emily vanished, but with no further leads, the trail had gone cold. Now, a single encounter in the park had reignited hope and dread. Jack picked up his phone and dialed Detective Maria Alvarez, one of the precinct's best investigators. If anyone could help him piece this together, it was her. "Monroe," came Alvarez's crisp voice after the second ring. "What's going on?" "I think I've found Emily Carter," Jack said, cutting straight to the point. "Or at least I think I've seen her. I need your help." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Alvarez responded, her tone sharp with interest. "Where?" "The park on Jefferson," Jack explained. "I ran into a woman and a little girl yesterday. Something felt off. I couldn't place it at first, but now I'm sure. The girl matches Emily's description, right down to the brown eyes and the way she clung to that stuffed toy. And the woman, she was nervous, jittery, kept trying to leave. You're telling me you had Emily Carter in front of you and let her walk away?" Alvarez's voice held a note of disbelief, though it wasn't accusatory. Jack exhaled sharply. "I didn't have proof, Maria. She claimed the girl was her daughter, even gave me names. Without cause, I couldn't do anything." Alvarez sighed on the other end. "All right. Meet me at the station in 20 minutes. Bring everything you have." The precinct's conference room was cluttered with case files and coffee cups when Jack and Alvarez spread Emily Carter's file across the table. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, adding to the tense atmosphere. "So," Alvarez began, flipping through the pages, "Emily disappeared from her front yard while her mother was inside. No cameras, no witnesses, except for one neighbor who saw a blue sedan parked nearby. The car wasn't linked to anyone in the neighborhood, but that's where the trail ends." Jack nodded, his arms crossed as he leaned against the table. "That's what stuck with me. The woman in the park had the same kind of car. Light blue sedan, older model. But here's the kicker. When I talked to the food vendor at the park, he said she's been there before. Always with the girl. Always looking over her shoulder." Alvarez tapped her pen against the table thoughtfully. "If it's her, she's not trying to blend in completely. She's just staying off the radar enough not to raise suspicion. No cameras. No consistent routine. She knows how to stay hidden." Jack pointed to the flyer. "Look at her face, Maria. That girl I saw wasn't carefree. She wasn't laughing or playing. She was scared. And when she whispered, 'Or else she'll know.'" He paused, his jaw tightening. That wasn't just a child being told not to talk to strangers. That was fear. Alvarez sat back, her brow furrowed. "If we're dealing with someone who's this deliberate, we need to approach carefully. If she suspects we're onto her, she could bolt, or worse." Jack nodded grimly. "We need more evidence. Surveillance footage from around the park, traffic cams, anything we can find." "Agreed," Alvarez said, grabbing her laptop. "Let's start pulling data." The hours ticked by as Jack and Alvarez combed through every available source. They accessed surveillance footage from traffic cameras near the park's entrance, scrutinizing every vehicle it passed through during the time frame Jack had been there. Finally, a grainy image appeared on the screen. A light blue sedan pulling out of the parking lot. The timestamp matched the moment Claire and the girl had left. "There it is," Jack said, leaning closer. "Let's trace it." Using the city's network of traffic cameras, they followed the car's route. It weaved through suburban streets before disappearing in a neighborhood of rundown homes and overgrown yards on the outskirts of the city. Alvarez jotted down the location. "That's our first lead," she said. "We'll canvass the area, see if anyone's seen her." Before Jack could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. It was a call from dispatch. He answered quickly. "Monroe here. Officer Monroe, we've just had a report of a suspicious individual matching your description of the woman from the park," the dispatcher said. "A neighbor in the South End says she's been spotted with a little girl who doesn't seem to match her." Jack's heart raced. "Address." The dispatcher rattled off the location, and Jack grabbed his coat. "Let's go," he said to Alvarez. The South End was a stark contrast to the park's peaceful atmosphere. Crumbling sidewalks lined the streets, and chain-link fences enclosed neglected yards. Jack and Alvarez parked a block away from the reported address, their unmarked car blending into the surroundings. The house in question was a small, single-story structure with faded paint and boarded-up windows. A rusted tricycle lay on its side in the yard, its handlebars twisted and broken. Jack's stomach churned at the sight. Alvarez peered through binoculars at the house. Curtains are drawn. No sign of movement. Jack's hand tightened on his radio. "We need to do this carefully. If she sees us coming, she might panic." The two officers approached the house cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the cracked pavement. Jack's eyes scanned every detail. The crooked mailbox, the empty flower pots, the faint sound of a television coming from inside. He knocked on the door, his knuckles rapping softly against the wood. "Claire Bennett, this is Officer Monroe. I'd like to speak with you." For a moment, there was silence. Then, a shadow moved behind the curtains. Jack's pulse quickened. Inside, Claire stood frozen, her breathing shallow. She had seen the patrol car earlier and had been on edge ever since. Emily sat on the couch, clutching her stuffed bunny tightly. "Who's at the door?" Emily asked in a small voice. "No one," Claire said quickly, her voice trembling. "Stay here." She peeked through the curtain and saw Jack standing there, his expression calm but resolute. Panic surged through her. "They're here," she muttered to herself, pacing. "They're here to take her." Jack knocked again, his voice steady. "Claire, I just want to talk. Can you open the door for me?" Inside, Claire clutched a kitchen knife, her hands trembling. Her mind raced with fragmented thoughts. She couldn't lose Emily, not after everything she had done to protect her. But as she looked at the girl's wide, innocent eyes, a flicker of doubt crept in. "Claire," Jack called out again. "I know you're scared, but you don't have to do this alone. Let's talk." Emily's small voice broke the tension. "Why don't we let him in?" Claire's grip on the knife loosened slightly. She stared at the door, her mind a battlefield of fear and desperation. Outside, Jack exchanged a glance with Alvarez. "We need to be ready," he murmured. "She's unpredictable." Alvarez nodded, her hand hovering near her radio. "We've got backup ready to move in. Just give the word." Jack took a deep breath, his voice softening. "Claire, whatever happened, we can figure it out. Just let Emily go. She needs to be safe." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the faint sound of a lock clicking echoed from inside. The door creaked open, revealing Claire's pale, tear-streaked face. Her eyes darted between Jack and Alvarez, her body trembling. Behind her, Emily stood clutching her bunny, her expression a mixture of fear and confusion. I just wanted to protect her," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "I couldn't lose her too." Jack stepped forward slowly, his hands visible and empty. "It's okay, Claire. Let's make sure Emily's safe. Then we can figure this out together." Claire sank to her knees, the knife slipping from her grasp as tears streamed down her face. Emily ran into Jack's arms, her tiny frame shaking as she sobbed. The nightmare was far from over, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. A fractured reality. Claire Bennett sat in the dimly lit interrogation room of the precinct, her pale hands trembling as they rested on the steel table. The space was stark, its neutral walls and harsh fluorescent lighting a sharp contrast to the chaos swirling inside her mind. She hadn't said a word since her arrest, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her, as though searching for answers among the scratches and stains. Detective Maria Alvarez observed her from the other side of the one-way glass, her arms crossed and her brow furrowed. Jack Monroe stood beside her, his expression unreadable but his mind churning. "She's not going to talk unless we handle this delicately," Alvarez said, her voice low. "She's in a fragile state, and if we push too hard, she might shut down, or worse." Jack nodded. "We need to understand why she did this. It's the only way to ensure Emily stays safe." Alvarez entered the room, her footsteps deliberately soft. She carried a folder under one arm, its contents carefully selected to guide the conversation. Claire flinched at the sound of the door closing, but didn't look up. "Claire," Alvarez began gently, taking the seat across from her. "I'm Detective Alvarez. I just want to talk. No one's here to hurt you." Claire didn't respond, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. Alvarez placed the folder on the table and opened it, revealing a series of photographs. The first was of Emily Carter, her face bright with the unburdened joy of childhood. Next to it was an image of Lily Bennett, Claire's late daughter. The resemblance between the two was striking. "We know about Lily," Alvarez said, her tone soft but steady. "We know how much you loved her and how hard it was to lose her." At the mention of Lily's name, Claire's head snapped up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face etched with a mix of grief and defiance. "You don't know anything," she hissed, her voice cracking. "You don't know what it's like to lose a child." "You're right," Alvarez admitted. "I can't imagine that kind of pain. But I do know that love can make us do things we wouldn't normally do. Things we think are right, even when they're not." Claire's lips trembled, and her gaze flickered to the photograph of Lily. Her hands reached for it instinctively, but she stopped short, as though afraid to touch it. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," Claire whispered after a long silence. I just wanted her back." The past unveiled. Claire had once been a vibrant, loving mother. Lily was her world, her reason for getting out of bed every morning. They'd shared everything: bedtime stories, pancake breakfasts, and lazy afternoons at the park. But all of that had been ripped away in a single moment, a car accident on a rainy afternoon that left Claire shattered and alone. The months that followed were a blur of grief and guilt. Friends and family offered condolences, but their words felt hollow. Therapy sessions dragged on, their platitudes doing little to mend her fractured heart. Her husband, unable to bear the strain, eventually left, taking the last remnants of her support system with him. Then came the psychiatric facility. The doctors there spoke of healing and closure, but Claire saw only confinement. She learned to say the right things, to nod at the right times, and eventually, they declared her stable. But stability was an illusion. Alone in her small, empty apartment, Claire's grief transformed into something darker. At first, it was just dolls. She bought them from thrift stores and dressed them in clothes Lily might have worn. She arranged them at the dining table, read them bedtime stories, and convinced herself that she wasn't alone. But the fantasy wasn't enough. It was never enough. The day Claire saw Emily Carter playing in her front yard was like a cruel twist of fate. She'd been driving aimlessly through a suburban neighborhood, drawn to the quiet streets that reminded her of better times. When she saw Emily, something inside her snapped. The resemblance was uncanny. Her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her carefree laughter filling the air. For weeks, Claire returned to the neighborhood, watching Emily from a distance. She told herself it was innocent, that she just wanted to see her, but each time, the pull grew stronger. Emily wasn't just a little girl, she was a chance to rewrite the past. Back in the present. I wasn't trying to kidnap her, Claire insisted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. She was alone. No one was watching her. What if someone dangerous came along? What if she ended up like Lily? Alvarez's expression remained neutral, but Jack could see the gears turning in her mind through the one-way glass. Claire's actions weren't rooted in malice. They were a product of unresolved trauma, but that didn't excuse the harm she had caused. Claire, Alvarez said gently, Emily has a family who loves her. A family that's been searching for her every day since she disappeared. They were watching her, just like you watched Lily. You took her from them, just like someone took Lily from you. Those words seemed to pierce Claire's delusion. Her shoulders sagged, and she let out a choked sob. I didn't mean to hurt her, she said. I just wanted to protect her. Meanwhile, across the hall, in a separate room, Emily sat with her parents, Sarah and Mike Carter. The reunion had been bittersweet. Emily clung to her mother, her small body trembling as she buried her face in Sarah's shoulder. Mike sat beside them, his arm wrapped protectively around them both. Mommy, Emily whispered, her voice muffled. Why did she take me? Sarah's heart broke at the question. She stroked Emily's hair, struggling to find the right words. She was very sad. Sweetheart. She thought she was helping you, but she wasn't. Mike's jaw tightened. She's not going to hurt you anymore, he said firmly. We're here now. You're safe. But safety was a fragile thing. The trauma of Emily's ordeal was evident in her wide eyes and hesitant movements. Sarah and Mike knew the road to recovery would be long and fraught with challenges. But for now, they held on to their daughter as tightly as they could, vowing never to let her go again. Claire's confession. In the interrogation room, Claire's walls were crumbling. She spoke in fragmented sentences, her words tumbling out as if they'd been bottled up for years. I saw her playing. She looked so happy. I thought, maybe if I could fix it. Fix everything. Alvarez leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. Claire, we know you've been through unimaginable pain, but taking Emily didn't bring Lily back. It only caused more pain, for Emily and for her family. Tears streamed down Claire's face as the weight of her actions sank in. I just wanted to be a good mother, she whispered. I just wanted to make it right. Jack entered the room then, his expression solemn. He placed a hand on Alvarez's shoulder, signaling that it was time to wrap up. Claire, he said, his voice steady, you need help. But the first step is taking responsibility for what you've done. Claire nodded weakly, her body slumping in defeat. I'm sorry, she murmured, though it wasn't clear whether the apology was meant for Emily, Lily, or herself. The unraveling ends. As Claire was escorted back to her cell, Jack and Alvarez watched her go. She's broken, Alvarez said quietly. But that doesn't mean she didn't cause harm. Jack nodded. Emily's safe now, and that's what matters. But this case, it's going to stick with me. Alvarez sighed, her eyes distant. It'll stick with all of us. Back in her cell, Claire sat on the edge of her cot, staring at her hands. In her mind, she could still hear Lily's laughter, see her bright smile. But now, those memories were tinged with the stark reality of what she had done. For the first time in years, Claire felt the full weight of her grief and the devastation it had caused. Rebuilding trust. The Carter household was quiet, yet the air buzzed with an undercurrent of unease. Emily sat cross-legged on the plush carpet of her room, her small hands gripping the stuffed bunny Claire had given her. Her parents, Sarah and Mike, stood at the doorway, their expressions a mix of relief and sorrow. Sarah cleared her throat and took a tentative step forward. Sweetheart, do you want to talk about anything? Emily didn't look up. Her gaze remained fixed on the bunny's drooping ear. "Why did she call me Lily?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike exchanged a glance with Sarah, his heart breaking at the confusion in his daughter's voice. He knelt beside Emily, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She was very sad, Emily. She lost someone she loved very much, and she thought you were her. "But I'm not Lily," Emily said, her tone more firm. She looked up at her parents, her wide eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm Emily." Why didn't she see that? Sarah knelt on Emily's other side, wrapping her arms around her daughter. Sometimes, when people are hurting, they see what they want to see instead of what's real. It doesn't make what she did right, but it helps us understand why she did it. Emily leaned into her mother's embrace, her small body trembling. "I missed you and Daddy so much," she whispered. "I was scared she'd never let me come home." Mike tightened his jaw, his grip on Emily's shoulder firm but reassuring. "You're home now, Em. We're not letting you go anywhere ever again." A safe space. Later that evening, Sarah tucked Emily into bed, sitting beside her as she stared up at the ceiling. The room was quiet except for the faint sound of the wind outside the window. Sarah gently stroked Emily's hair, her heart aching for the innocence her daughter had lost. "Mommy," Emily said after a long silence, "what if she comes back?" Sarah's breath hitched, but she kept her voice steady. "She can't, sweetheart. The police are making sure of that. You're safe here, I promise." Emily nodded, though her brow remained furrowed. "I don't think she was all bad," she said softly. Sometimes she looked sad. Like really, really sad. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "She was sad, honey. But being sad doesn't mean it's okay to take someone away from their family." Emily turned to face her mother, her eyes searching for reassurance. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Sarah hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I think the police and the doctors will help her. But right now, what matters is that you're home. And we're here for you." Emily nodded again, her eyelids growing heavy. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah sat quietly, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall. The fear lingered, but for the first time in weeks, there was also hope. A fractured mind. In her cell at the high-security mental health facility, Claire Bennett sat on the edge of her cot, her knees drawn to her chest. The room was small and sterile, its white walls devoid of the warmth and clutter she had surrounded herself with in her apartment. She clutched a photograph of Lily, a small concession the staff had allowed her, and stared at it with unblinking eyes. In her mind, Lily's laughter still echoed, a bittersweet melody that both comforted and tormented her. Dr. Evelyn Marks, a seasoned psychiatrist with a calm demeanor and a no-nonsense attitude, entered the room. She carried a notebook and pen, her sharp eyes taking in Claire's disheveled state. "Claire," Dr. Marks began, her voice measured, "how are you feeling today?" Claire didn't respond at first. Her fingers traced the edges of the photograph, as if she could bring Lily back through sheer will. "I don't belong here," she said finally, her voice distant. Dr. Marks pulled up a chair, sitting across from Claire. "You're here because you need help, Claire. What you did, taking Emily, wasn't the right way to deal with your pain. But we're here to figure out why you did it and how we can help you move forward." Claire's eyes snapped to the doctor's, a flicker of anger breaking through her otherwise detached expression. "I didn't hurt her. I protected her. She needed me." Dr. Marks nodded slowly, her pen poised over her notebook. "You thought you were helping her, but Emily already had a family who loved her. Taking her away caused them pain. Pain similar to what you felt when you lost Lily." Claire's hands trembled, the photograph shaking in her grip. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Lily was everything. She was my whole world. And then she was gone, just like that. No warning, no chance to say goodbye." Tears welled in her eyes, and her voice broke. "When I saw Emily, it was like Lily was back. How could I let her go?" Dr. Marks leaned forward, her tone softening. What happened to Lily was a tragedy, Claire. Losing a child is something no parent should ever have to endure. But holding on to Emily wasn't the answer. It wasn't fair to her, or to you. Claire's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. For the first time, she let the photograph fall from her hands. "I just wanted to be her mom again," she whispered. Piecing the puzzle. Back at the precinct, Jack Monroe and Maria Alvarez pored over the final pieces of evidence in the case. The surveillance footage, receipts, and testimony painted a clear picture of Claire's actions, but it was the psychiatric evaluations that provided the most insight into her state of mind. "She's not a criminal," Alvarez said, setting the file down. "She's a woman who broke under the weight of her grief, but that doesn't make what she did any less harmful." Jack nodded, his jaw tight. "Emily's lucky we found her when we did. If Claire had gone further underground, we might never have found her." Alvarez glanced at the clock, the late hour reflected in the dim precinct lighting. "What happens next?" "Claire gets the treatment she needs," Jack replied, "and Emily gets the chance to heal with her family. That's all we can hope for." A new chapter. Weeks turned into months as the Carters worked to rebuild their lives. Therapy sessions became a regular part of their routine, helping Emily process the fear and confusion she had experienced. Slowly but surely, her laughter returned, filling the house with a sound Sarah and Mike had feared they might never hear again. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Emily looked up at her parents with a determined expression. "I want to help other kids," she said. Mike raised an eyebrow, setting down his fork. "Help them how, Em?" "I want to make sure no one else gets taken," she said firmly. "Like I was." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "That's a brave thing to say, sweetheart. And we'll help you however we can." As the family shared a group hug, the weight of the past began to lift, replaced by the promise of a brighter future. Claire, meanwhile, remained at the facility, her journey toward healing only just beginning. Though her days were filled with therapy and introspection, the image of Lily stayed with her, a bittersweet reminder of what she had lost and what she had done. For the first time, she allowed herself to face the truth. Healing wasn't about holding on. It was about learning to let go. A community of healing. The brisk air of early autumn settled over the city as the Carters continued piecing their lives back together. Emily, now 8 years old, had returned to her routine of school and playdates, but the shadows of her ordeal lingered in subtle ways. She no longer felt completely at ease around new people, and her once carefree laughter often came with a tinge of hesitancy. Her parents, Sarah and Mike, remained vigilant. They had enrolled her in therapy, where she worked with a child psychologist who helped her navigate her emotions. Emily's progress was steady, but the scars were undeniable. Sarah, ever the optimist, decided that their family could use a new chapter, one that would include the entire community. One evening, over dinner, Sarah proposed an idea that had been simmering in her mind. "What if we start a neighborhood watch group?" she asked, setting her fork down. Mike glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "A watch group?" "Yes," Sarah said, her tone insistent. "There's so much we can learn from what happened to Emily. If we'd had better communication in the neighborhood, someone might have noticed Claire sooner. Maybe we can prevent something like this from happening again." Emily looked up from her plate, her curiosity piqued. "You mean like keeping an eye out for strangers?" "Exactly," Sarah said, smiling at her daughter. "Not just strangers, but making sure everyone in the community feels safe. We can organize meetings, share tips, and get to know each other better." Mike leaned back in his chair, nodding thoughtfully. "It's not a bad idea. It might help people feel more connected and more aware." Emily grinned, her first genuine smile in weeks. "Can I help?" "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah said, leaning over to kiss the top of her daughter's head. "This is as much for you as it is for everyone else." The first meeting. A week later, the Carters hosted the first neighborhood watch meeting in their backyard. The turnout surprised them. Nearly every family in the neighborhood showed up. some bringing baked goods or coffee as a gesture of support. Sarah stood at the head of the group, holding a clipboard and radiating determination. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the topic. "As you know, our family went through something unimaginable a few months ago. But we're not here to dwell on the past. We're here to make sure our neighborhood is a place where all of our children can feel safe." The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces a mix of empathy and resolve. Mike stepped forward, taking over. "We've spoken with local law enforcement, and they've offered resources to help us get started. Officer Monroe will be joining us shortly to share some tips and strategies." At that moment, Jack Monroe arrived, his presence commanding yet approachable. He nodded to the crowd, holding up a folder filled with handouts. "Good evening, everyone," he said. "I'm here to help you build a network of safety and awareness. Together, we can make sure no family has to go through what the Carters experienced." For the next hour, Jack walked the group through practical steps: how to identify suspicious behavior, the importance of communication, and the benefits of installing security cameras in shared spaces. He emphasized vigilance without paranoia, reminding everyone that building a strong community was the best defense against harm. By the end of the meeting, the neighbors were energized, their initial trepidation replaced with a sense of purpose. As the group dispersed, several families approached Sarah and Mike to thank them for taking the initiative. Emily, meanwhile, ran up to Jack, clutching her stuffed bunny. "Thank you for finding me," she said, her voice small but steady. Jack knelt down to her level, a soft smile on his face. "You were very brave, Emily. Don't ever forget that." Claire's journey. Across town, in the quiet confines of the high-security mental health facility, Claire Bennett's days were filled with therapy sessions, group discussions, and hours of solitude. The sterile environment was a far cry from the world she had built for herself and Emily in her small apartment. Dr. Evelyn Marks remained her primary psychiatrist, visiting her daily to work through the tangled web of grief, guilt, and delusion that had led Claire to take Emily. "Claire," Dr. Marks said during one session, "do you think about Emily often?" Claire nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I can't stop. I close my eyes, and I see her face. But sometimes I see Lily instead. It's like they've merged into one person in my mind." Dr. Marks leaned forward, her pen poised over her notebook. "That's because your grief for Lily never fully healed. You projected that loss onto Emily, convincing yourself that she could fill the void." Tears welled in Claire's eyes. "But I wasn't trying to hurt her. I thought I could give her a better life." Dr. Marks softened her tone. "You loved Lily deeply, and that love blinded you to the harm you were causing. But understanding that is the first step toward healing." Over the weeks, Claire began to unravel her delusions piece by piece. She started to differentiate between her memories of Lily and her actions involving Emily. It was painful work, each revelation like reopening an old wound, but it was necessary. One afternoon, as Claire sat in her room sketching, something Dr. Marks had encouraged to help her process her emotions, she drew an image of Lily and Emily standing side by side, each holding a hand out to her. She stared at the drawing for a long time, her chest tightening. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting," she whispered to herself. "It means moving forward." A community transformed. Back in the neighborhood, the watch group had become a well-oiled machine. Weekly meetings brought families together, fostering a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. Children played freely under the watchful eyes of neighbors, and the community grew stronger with each passing day. Emily flourished in this environment, her confidence slowly returning. One afternoon, she stood before her classmates during a school assembly and shared her story, not of fear, but of hope. "Sometimes bad things happen," she said, gripping the microphone tightly. "But when people work together, they can make things better. That's what my neighborhood did, and that's what we can all do." The applause that followed was deafening, and for the first time since her ordeal, Emily felt truly whole. A glimmer of redemption. Months later, Dr. Marks met with Claire to discuss her progress. "You've come a long way," the doctor said, her tone both firm and kind. "But there's still work to be done. Are you ready for the next step?" Claire nodded slowly. "I think so. I want to face what I've done. I want to apologize." It was the beginning of a new chapter for Claire, a long road of accountability and redemption. She might never fully escape the consequences of her actions, but she was determined to try. A final note. The Carters and the community continued to thrive, their lives forever changed, but not defined by the past. And though the shadows of fear and grief lingered, they were no longer insurmountable. Together, they had built something stronger, a future filled with hope, resilience, and the unwavering belief that healing was possible. A new beginning. The months following Emily's return were marked by growth, resilience, and the steady march of healing. While the Carter family found their footing again, the echoes of their ordeal lingered, not as a haunting shadow, but as a reminder of how far they'd come. The neighborhood watch thrived, Emily's confidence grew, and Claire Bennett, far away in her mental health facility, began to rebuild the fragments of her shattered life. But healing, as Sarah Carter often told Emily, was not a straight path. It was a winding journey, one that required patience, courage, and the strength to face what had been left behind. Emily's milestone. It was a crisp spring morning when Sarah walked Emily to the school gates for her first day back. For months, Emily had been homeschooled while she worked through her trauma in therapy. But now, she was ready to rejoin her classmates, and the weight of this milestone was not lost on her parents. Sarah knelt beside Emily at the gates, smoothing a stray lock of auburn hair from her daughter's face. "You nervous, sweetie?" she asked, her voice as warm as the sun on their backs. Emily nodded, clutching her backpack straps tightly. "A little," she admitted, "but also excited. I missed my friends." "They've missed you too," Sarah said with a smile. "And remember, if anything feels too hard, you can talk to me or Dad anytime. We're always here for you." Emily looked up at her mother, her wide brown eyes steady and filled with a newfound determination. "I know," she said, "and I'll be okay. Promise." Sarah hugged her tightly, the bittersweet ache of letting go swelling in her chest, as Emily turned and ran toward the school building. Her steps quick and sure, Sarah watched with tears in her eyes. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental, a symbol of the progress Emily had made and the strength she had found within herself. A letter from Claire. Weeks later, a plain envelope arrived at the Carter household. Addressed to Sarah and Mike, it bore no return address, but the postmark revealed it had come from the mental health facility where Claire Bennett was being held. Mike held the envelope in his hands, his jaw tightening. "It's from her," he said, his voice low. Sarah glanced at him, her expression cautious. "Do you think we should open it?" After a long pause, Mike nodded. "We should. It's part of moving forward." Together, they sat at the dining table, the envelope resting between them like a fragile truce. Sarah carefully opened it, revealing a handwritten letter. The writing was neat but shaky, each word carrying the weight of its author's struggle. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I know that no words can undo what I've done. I took something from you that can never be replaced, the peace and safety every family deserves. For that, I am deeply and profoundly sorry. Losing my daughter, Lily, broke something inside me. I thought taking Emily would fill that void, that it would bring me the solace I've been searching for since the day Lily died. But I was wrong. I see that now. Emily deserves to grow up surrounded by love and stability, and I'm grateful she has that with you. I hope you can forgive me one day, though I understand if you cannot. My only wish is for Emily to live a happy and full life, free from the shadows of what I did. Sincerely, Claire Bennett." The room was silent as Sarah and Mike read the letter together. When they finished, Sarah set it down, her hands trembling slightly. "What do you think?" Mike asked, his voice careful. Sarah sighed, her gaze distant. I think she's trying to take responsibility. It doesn't change what happened, but it feels genuine. Mike leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. She caused Emily so much pain. It's hard to feel sympathy for her. I know, Sarah said softly. But forgiveness isn't for her. It's for us. For Emily. Holding on to anger won't help anyone. After a long silence, Mike nodded. You're right. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. No, Sarah agreed. It doesn't. They folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unsure yet whether to share it with Emily. For now, it was enough to acknowledge its existence. Claire's turning point. At the mental health facility, Claire continued her therapy with Dr. Marks. The sessions were grueling but necessary, forcing Claire to confront the depths of her grief and the harm she had caused. One afternoon, Dr. Marks introduced a new exercise. She handed Claire a notebook and a pen. I want you to write letters to Lily, she said. Tell her everything you've been holding on to. The guilt, the love, the pain. This is your chance to say what you couldn't. Claire hesitated, her fingers curling around the pen. What if it makes it worse? It might at first, Dr. Marks admitted. But it's also a way to start letting go. Over the next weeks, Claire poured her heart onto the pages of the notebook. She wrote about the rainy afternoon of the accident, the unbearable silence that followed, and the desperation that led her to take Emily. She wrote about the moments of clarity when she realized the depth of her mistakes and the flickers of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find peace again. One evening, she read a letter aloud to Dr. Marks. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. Dear Lily, I miss you every single day. I miss your laughter, your hugs, the way you used to sing to yourself when you thought no one was listening. I miss being your mom. For so long, I tried to hold on to you, even when I knew it wasn't possible. I tried to bring you back in the only way I knew how, but I see now that it wasn't right. I wasn't saving Emily. I was trying to save myself, and in doing so, I hurt her. I hurt her family. I know I can never make up for that, but I want you to know I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. You'll always be in my heart, Lily. But it's time to let you rest. I love you forever. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she finished reading. For the first time in years, she felt the faintest glimmer of relief. It wasn't closure, but it was a start, a future of possibility. As summer approached, the Carter family planned a weekend picnic at the park where Emily had once been taken. It was a deliberate choice, a way to reclaim a place that had once been a source of fear. Emily ran ahead, her laughter ringing out as she chased a butterfly across the grass. Sarah and Mike watched her, their hands intertwined. She's doing so well, Sarah said, her voice filled with pride. Mike nodded. She's stronger than I ever imagined. As Emily ran back to them, her face flushed with joy. Sarah knelt down and wrapped her arms around her daughter. We're so proud of you, sweetheart, she said. You've come so far. Emily beamed, her eyes shining with determination. I'm proud of us too. And in that moment, under the warm glow of the sun, the Carter family felt the weight of the past lift just a little more. The future stretched out before them, unpredictable and uncertain, but filled with possibility. Epilogue. A community united. The neighborhood watch, now a cornerstone of the community, continued to grow and thrive. Officer Jack Monroe attended the monthly meetings, offering guidance and support. The Carter family remained at the heart of the group, their story a testament to the strength of unity and resilience. And though Claire Bennett remained in the facility, her journey toward healing served as a quiet reminder that even in the darkest moments, redemption was possible. The city moved forward, not forgetting the past, but learning from it. Each small act of kindness, each gesture of vigilance, building a safer and more compassionate world.